Hi, I'm Faris Natour. I'm Human Rights Director at BSR, and it's been a really eventful few weeks here since early June when the UN Human Rights Council endorsed the guiding principles on business and human rights. The guiding principles outline steps that companies can take to respect human rights and to make sure that victims of human rights abuse have access to effective remedies. And the UN's endorsement of the principles really cemented their status as the global standard for business and human rights. So we've been working with our member companies to establish or update their human rights management systems in line with the principles, and our approach is really based on 4 steps. 1, adopt a human rights policy. 2, assess your company's human rights impacts. 3, integrate human rights throughout your business. And 4, measure and track and report on your performance. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the questions that we most often get from companies as we go through those 4 steps. So the first step is adopting a human rights policy. And a human rights policy really shows that your company is serious about its commitment to respect human rights. And that's important both for the internal audience, for your employees, and the external stakeholder community. You really should have a policy that outlines your commitments, that outlines your overall governance process for human rights, and that explains your expectations for your suppliers and other business partners. And the policy should be signed off on by the executive leadership of the company, and it should be implemented through operational procedures and codes of conduct and guidelines that live one level below the policy. So one question we get a lot is whether you need to refer to an external standard like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And the answer is very simply yes, you really should. One reason for that is it really shows that you've done your homework, that you're really serious about your human rights commitment, and it shows that you're committed to respecting all human rights, and you don't just take a pick and choose approach of, well, we care about this one, but we don't care so much about another one. There's a business benefit to referring to the Universal Declaration in your human rights policy. You really define and put boundaries around the term human rights. You say that for us, human rights means the principles outlined in the declaration and nothing else. So you exclude issues that a fringe organization may think are really important and you should really address, but that aren't really accepted as human rights by the international community. So step 2 is assessing your human rights impacts. And what we do there with companies is we take a look across all operations and we map those operations against the universe of human rights issues. We do desk-based research. We do interviews with key managers at the operational level or at the executive level. We interview stakeholders, and soon, you see a landscape of human rights risks, impacts, and opportunities for that specific company, and you can start prioritizing parts of the business that need more attention on human rights, that maybe need more research to figure out what exactly the impacts are. So in addition to this broader corporate-wide human rights impact assessment, companies should really do site-specific or product-specific human rights impact assessments in those areas that were identified as the highest risk areas. And you really want to do those specific impact assessments as early as possible in the product life cycle or in the life cycle of a project or a site. The reason for that is that the sooner you catch a risk or an impact, the easier it is to address, right? It's you can catch an issue before it fully materializes or before it even becomes a major human rights challenge. It's important to remember prevention and mitigation is always easier, cheaper, and more effective than remediation. Step 3 is integrating human rights throughout the business. And when it comes to human rights, integration isn't just a buzzword. It really is the most difficult operational challenge, and also the most far-reaching solution for a lot of companies struggling with human rights. What it really means is human rights shouldn't be siloed somewhere in the human resources department, maybe in legal or in CSR. They really should be a part of the core value system of the company, and really be considered at all, key decisions, be an integral part of processes and policies that guide the company's operations. For most of our clients, building that bridge between headquarters and the site level operational staff is really the key challenge with integration. One example from a recent work in the mining industry is that you really try to figure out how do you create a human rights strategy at the corporate level that takes into account the daily challenges faced by your security staff at the different sites around the world. How do you bring that perspective in? And conversely, how do you make sure that the site level security staff really follows the policy once it's being implemented? So for integration, in addition to training, the key is really shared ownership. You want to give operational managers a real stake in developing a human rights strategy and management system. Going back to the mining company, they developed a grievance system where corporate headquarters really defined the reporting requirements for the system, but it was up to the sites on how to implement the grievance mechanism. And so in the end, you had very unique and very specific grievance systems at each site, but you had consistent reporting into headquarters so that you could compare and better evaluate how the system is working overall. Step 4 is measuring and reporting on your human rights performance. And in the guiding principles, John Ruggie says that companies really need to know and show that they're respecting human rights. And measuring performance helps you know whether your policies and your processes are working effectively. And reporting shows your stakeholders that you're respecting human rights. But it's not really easy to implement. Companies often struggle with finding the right indicators and defining success. They struggle with causality, with really what the boundaries are of their impact, and how to even find the data and measure performance over time. In our experience, it really helps focusing on measuring input and output rather than impact, if that is too difficult to do. For example, you may want to measure how many employees you've trained on human rights, or how many total hours of training you've provided. A grievance mechanism and a grievance procedure is also a really good source of data and a good way to report on your performance. More grievances brought to the company's attention probably means that you have a good grievance system in place, and it also gives you really good insight on what your human rights issues are and how your human rights management system is starting to take effect. And we now also see leading companies starting to evaluate what impact they have on human rights more broadly. The apparel, footwear, and toy industry is a good example. It's an industry that is fairly mature in managing direct human rights impacts in the supply chain. And so now we see companies starting to look beyond labor issues in their factories and think about what impact they have on the communities more broadly over time by sourcing from them. So these are the 4 steps of our approach to human rights. And we've been doing this work for a long time now at BSR, but what we've really noticed in the last couple of years is more and more industries and companies coming to the table here. It used to be just extractives companies or technology companies that were focused on human rights. Now we're working with companies in pharmaceuticals, in media, in financial services. It's really, human rights has really risen to the top of the sustainability and CSR agenda in pretty much every industry out there.